Elimination game. We'll start with that. John McMullen, do you concur? Happy Thanksgiving. Hope the Turkey Day went well for you. Do you concur that tonight is a virtual elimination game for these two teams?
Yeah, not in a literal sense, obviously, but certainly the team that loses this game is basically out of it. Because if you saw what happened over the weekend, and by the way, Thanksgiving worked out very, very well for the Eagles, but yesterday wasn't nearly as good as far as everybody being involved in the playoff hunt. But there's so many teams jumbled for those two wildcard spots in the NFC. The Eagles have to win this game if they want to stay relevant in that push.
John, let's get down into some business here. Ann Rappaport reporting Paul Turner expected to see snaps in the slot with Jordan Matthews going to the outside here. And he also reports that the Eagles will limit or possibly deactivate Agholor. What is your take on Agholor tonight, and what might occur if he is limited or deactivated?
Well, I expected him to scale back his work somewhat. If he's inactive, I think that tells you things are at a bad situation, because we kind of mentioned last week on the show, if you think it's a confidence issue, and some people will point to that and say, look, this is a former first-round pick. He's got some serious physical gifts, so it almost has to be a confidence-based issue. However, if you believe that, this is the game you want him out there, because this is the worst secondary you're going to face all year, certainly for the rest of the season. So if he can't get it done against this secondary, and you don't think he can get it done, well, that says to me you've given up on Nelson Agholor. So if he is inactive, I think it's a pretty clear indication that the Eagles are pulling the plug and looking to move on, not only for the end of this season, but certainly for next season.
What's your gut feeling tell you, John? Do you think he will play tonight or not?
My gut feeling last week was that he was going to play, and they were just going to scale back the workload a bit. But now, as I talk to some people today, I'm starting to think, no, they're just gonna go with Paul Turner in the slot, as you mentioned, and have Jordan work more on the outside. And if that's the case, as I said, that's a very, very bad sign for Nelson Agholor.
And, John, you talked about how Green Bay has a terrible secondary, but, of course, getting open doesn't seem to be Nelson Agholor's problem. Catching the ball when he is open is the problem. So if he doesn't play, how does that affect the offense? Because Jordan doesn't seem that good when he's in the slot.
Well, I would take issue with that, Pete. And I know that's what the Eagles say, and we've heard a number of people say that Nelson can get separation, and they point to the big drop against Seattle where he did get open against Richard Sherman. And they point to that and say, look, he can get open. But he doesn't do that on a consistent basis. One of the things Frank Reich has said a couple of times this year is that Nelson can get off press coverage. I haven't seen that. I don't think he gets off press coverage well at all or consistently. And that's one of his major problems. He gets out physical at the line of scrimmage. So I think the Eagles have been trying to protect him because of his status, even though obviously this regime is not responsible for drafting him. They still wanted him to succeed. And I think it's been a bit of hyperbole. I don't think he does get open, certainly at the level of a good NFL receiver. So I think a lot of that was just trying to bolster the confidence of a guy who's struggling a lot mentally, and I don't put a lot of stock in it, to be quite honest.
And, John, of course, I misspoke a little bit there. Jordan not as good on the outside was what I meant to say. Are they hurting the offense by moving Jordan Matthews to the outside?
No, they're hurting Jordan Matthews, but they're not hurting the offense, because you're right. He's much better in the slot than an outside receiver, but he's a better outside receiver than Nelson Agholor. And Paul Turner, although we haven't seen him play, unless you're going back to the preseason, which doesn't mean anything, it's hard to imagine he could be worse than Nelson has been playing. So I think it's sort of, are they hurting the offense? No, because they're taking their worst offensive player off the field in favor of a guy who at least is going to catch the football if you throw it his way, and he has an opportunity to do so. So I think it's hurting Jordan on a personal level because he's better inside from the slot, but I don't think it hurts the Eagles' offense because he's a better outside receiver than Nelson Agholor.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, jumping on with us a little earlier than normal today. And Wendell Smallwood expected to play a lot tonight. Matthews was ruled out on Saturday. Do you think this affects the offense at all or maybe even jumpstarts it?
It could help because I've been wanting to take a look at Wendell Smallwood get more touches running the football. But that, unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the way this offense wants to do things. And whether you want to call it hell-bent on using running back by committee, they want to split the carries. I would prefer going with the hot hand, and whether that's Darren Sproles, Wendell Smallwood, or even Kenyon Barner, give them a few touches in the first quarter, second quarter, and if somebody gets hot, ride them. But that doesn't seem like what the Eagles want to do, and I that's one of the things I criticize Doug Peterson and Frank Reich on. We've seen enough of Ryan Matthews to know what you have there, and unfortunately, you have a guy who's not going to answer the bell a lot. And this is just another example of in a game where we just talked about it, it's basically a playoff eliminator. He's not going to be there.
John McMullen's with us here, 97.3 ESPN.com. So if Agholor is not active tonight, and we know Matthews is not active, where is there a guy that, do we see – I think Turner could be active, but that's still 4 wide receivers. Do we get an extra corner, an extra lineman? Who's that extra guy maybe tonight that gets the nod to the active roster?
Well, yeah, I mean, because of where the Eagles are, they don't have another option at running back. They don't have another option at wide receiver, and Trey Burton's generally active anyway. So from a skill position standpoint, if you don't dress Nelson, you're not going to have that extra body. But remember, they typically only dress 4 receivers. So that would be the difference in the fact that Nelson is sat down and Paul Turner would be up. But the Eagles, during the week of practice, Frank Reich and Doug Peterson both mentioned they're trying to get 5 receivers ready to play against the Packers.
That's code word for we're not telling you what we're doing with Agholor yet.
Yeah, exactly. and they didn't want to say that. But while I laugh at that, and Dom Capers has done an absolutely awful job as the defensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers this season. But he wasn't losing sleep because he didn't know if Nelson Agholor was going to play or not tonight.
The guy tonight that I'm intrigued by is Treggs because Doug Peterson did say in his press conference the other day that he's in position to contribute more down the stretch. And with Agholor out, they did take a shot to him last week. But, I watched the game last night, and it seems like all over the NFL. I've been kind of talking about this more and more over the last couple of weeks. Tyreek Hill is a guy from West Alabama, a 5th-round pick that nobody heard of. There's guys like Jamison Crowder, who was a 4th-round pick, but they're small, fast guys, but they all seem to catch that ball in the slot and be able to get up the field. It seems that the Eagles have the hardest time developing wide receivers, guys that are lower picks that just come in and contribute. And it seems that they maybe have a couple guys that they can do that with.
Yeah, it's interesting. A bunch of us at the Eagles Media House were discussing this last week, and we were trying to come up, because I watch too much NFL football. I'll be the first to say that. But when I see games with other teams, doesn't matter who it is, you'll see 3 or 4 catches a game by NFL players where you say, there's nobody on the Eagles who can make that catch. There's nobody. And we're not talking about Julio Jones or Antonio Brown or Odell Beckham. There's guys all over this league that make plays and sort of pick up their quarterback. And then we got to discussing, we could not remember a Carson Wentz pass this year, other than the first completion of his career. If you guys remember, it was a great one-handed catch by Zach Ertz on a bad throw by Wentz. I can't think of another one. It's amazing how bad this group has been. And I know a lot of people say we don't criticize Carson Wentz enough. It has nothing to do with that. You see all over this league, receivers will occasionally pick up quarterbacks by making great catches, on bad throws that probably shouldn't be completed. You don't see that with the Philadelphia Eagles. You just don't.
John, your pick for tonight?
I think the Eagles are going to win the football game. I think Green Bay has struggled too much defensively, and it's a weird kind of matchup because Aaron Rodgers has picked it up offensively. Even though the Packers don't have much of a running game, they've been scoring points. But they've been giving up points at historic levels for that franchise. They've given up 30 points or more 4 straight games for the first time since the 1950s. That's how bad it's been in Green Bay. But then you look at this Eagles offense and say, well, how could they win sort of a shootout with this offense? So I think it's got to come to loggerheads, and I just kind of fall back on the Eagles have been great at home, and they're going to find a way to win this game. It'll probably be a special teams touchdown, a defensive touchdown, but I got the Eagles winning 27-24.
27-24. All right, don't forget, pick the perfect score tonight at 5:30. You're playing for $600. Don't steal John's score, 27-24. John, enjoy the game. We will, of course, have him for all 4 hours tomorrow in the Matt Blatt Kia